That's when the three big slave wars happen. And the last of those is the war with Spartacus. The first two were on Sicily, and they involved probably upwards of 100,000 slaves in each case who, got free, killed their masters, and rampaged around. But the Romans sent the legions, and of course the legions butchered all of them, and that was the end of that. Spartacus, famously, was a gladiator, but who escaped from a school near Capua, not too far from Naples, and eventually had well over 100,000 slaves following him all over the south of Italy. He tried to escape, supposedly, make a deal with the pirates, get out of Italy, but, that's might be hearsay. He never did get out of Italy, and was eventually hunted down by Crassus in cooperation with Pompey. So the thing is that revolt on any scale, large or small, isn't probably going to work. And it's hard to get away. There are slave catchers. There's branding, there's chains. And so it's
branding.
Difficult. There is branding and tattooing. Actually, tattooing is first found on a large scale in this period in Europe, and it's almost entirely for slaves. You tattoo a slave who's tried to escape.
How realistic was it in Gladiator when he had the mark of the Roman legion on his shoulder? Was that something they did as well?
They did that later on. So like in the later Roman period, when soldiers often tried to go AWOL and escape from the legions because it was a pretty bad lot,
right,
they began to tattoo soldiers with the names of their units. And so they're probably 100 years ahead of themselves there in Gladiator.
Got it. Okay. Real quick, I just got to go to the bathroom, but we'll be right back. Where were the Greeks like during this time when Rome's really rising, like Battle of Zama? Now they're starting, not all this land we're looking at on this map, but they're starting to get a lot of land like this. At some point they conquer the Greeks, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I guess the tongue-in-cheek answer is the Greeks were in Greece this whole time, and so like the heyday of Athens and Sparta as imperial powers is the 5th century BC, which is the early period of Rome's rise in central Italy. So the Roman Republic exists in this time, but it's not really a very big deal outside of central Italy. The Greek powers are conquered, famously, by Philip of Macedon, the father of Alexander, and become not officially part, but effectively part of the Macedonian Empire from that point onward. And they live in the shadow of the great Hellenistic kingdoms thereafter, the kingdoms founded by Alexander's generals. So Macedon remains a great power for 2 centuries after Alexander's death. There's the Seleucids in Asia Minor, and further east, the Ptolemies in Egypt. And all of these great kingdoms are the real power players in the Greek world throughout Rome's rise in the Western Mediterranean. So after Rome conquers Carthage, it faces these kingdoms and defeats all of them conclusively. The phalanx falls to the legion again and again. And the Romans conquer Greece famously in 146 BC, when Corinth, a very rich city, is besieged and destroyed.
Whoa. So I also feel like that's a common misconception, like just from the high level when we're looking at history, we think of Alexander, Greek, but like technically not. Similar idea, but he takes control of things, and it's not your traditional ancient Greek empire that we think about with some of the philosophers and stuff like that.
Yeah, they're very much on the periphery of the Greek world, the Macedonians. So I don't know if you ever played like Civilization, the computer games. Like,
I don't think I did.
So I was a big aficionado of Civ 3, which probably dates me. And every...
Why does that not surprise me?
Yeah, right. And every society has its leader. So like for the Romans, it's Julius Caesar. For Egypt, it's Cleopatra. For Greece, it's Alexander. He's their, de facto leader. And it kind of, I think, speaks to how he's become just part and parcel of the Greek national identity. But he spoke Greek, even though kind of a funky dialect of Greek in Macedonian, and it, of course, was taught by Aristotle very famously. Aristotle was his tutor, and so he knew all of the latest developments in Greek philosophy and Greek literature. The Iliad was his favorite book. He had it under his pillow every night. So he was thoroughly a member of Greek culture without quite being a Greek in the sense of being Athenian or Spartan or someone who would have gone to, Delphi routinely.
Right.
And so, they're part of that world, but on the edges of it. And that's an advantage to them. They're actually farther north. They have better land. It's more moist. They have a lot of horses. Their cavalry is a big deal. And they take advantage, Philip does, of the many squabbles of the Greek city-states to divide and conquer and make Greece part of the Macedonian Empire.
Yeah, and I think there was a great like docu-series type thing on Netflix about Alexander. I was watching a little while back. I didn't watch all of it, but a couple of the episodes. And, you know, this guy, he didn't live long.
No.
He died young. He also, his father was, I guess, murdered. And he suddenly is the, whatever it was, 17, 18-year-old taking power. And I forget how big the Macedonian Empire was at the time, but like he expanded it to pretty much everything to the east, no?
Oh yeah, I mean it's incredible. So you know he becomes king, or he begins his campaign at the age of 20, and dies at 32. And in that dozen years, conquers the known world, essentially. Macedon is a strong state by Greek standards when he becomes king. You know, it has all of what's now northern Greece, pretty much, little chunks of what's now Bulgaria, and has an efficient army that's built by his father Philip. He's the one who really evolves the phalanx, the famous Macedonian phalanx, with its very long sarissas, these very long pikes that are so long that any ordinary Greek phalanx can't get to come to grips with them. They kind of are impaled on these. I think there's 5 rows of spears go beyond the first man. There's these hedgehog of spears. And so while they pin down the enemy, the cavalry attacks on the flanks of the enemy and destroys them. It's a very effective 1-2 punch. Yeah. Where the phalanx pins you down, the cavalry comes around your flanks and destroys you. But Alexander perfects the use of this very, potentially very powerful instrument. And again, he never loses a battle against the most incredible range of foes. So he fights 3 big set-piece battles against the Persians, at Granicus, at Issus, and at Gaugamela, or Arbela.
Where is that in modern-day parlance?
Granicus is in what's now northwest Turkey.
Okay.
Issus is what's now far southeast Turkey, near the Syrian border. Near Antioch, where Antioch was later found very near there. And
Antioch.
Exactly. This guy, he definitely did. Yeah, the guy with the curls again. I should have brought a wig to this interview.
Yeah, you should have.
And then the last one, Gaugamela, is fought in Iraq, not too far from Babylon. And so these encounters, at each of them, he proves conclusively that Greek heavy infantry, and above all Macedonian cavalry, can destroy Asian light infantry in massive numbers. So he's very effective in these battles. But it really proves his brilliance, I think, in the Central Asian campaigns, the Indian campaigns, fighting armies no Greek had ever seen before. Everything from the steppe cavalry of, what's now Uzbekistan to the elephant armies of Pakistan.
Elephant armies.
He fights elephant cavalry. The Greeks never seen them before. And so he's the first Greek to engage with war elephants.
Oh, this is like before Hannibal and all.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because after Alexander, his generals made the elephants part of the arsenal of Mediterranean warfare, but it hadn't been before that.
Can you imagine being on a battlefield and seeing a fucking elephant, an angry elephant with with extra spikes coming out of its legs coming at you?
In Return of the King, the Lesser of the Rings movie, the Oliphants come out, with the big spikes and everything. Obviously, they're a little bit plus sized and everything, but the effect must have been kind of like that.
Dude, you're like running in with your little armor and spear, and you hear. Like in the background, you're done. You're just all right.
Supposedly, the reason that they had to turn around Alexander is his men wouldn't face more elephants. They were so tired of the elephants.
How would they strategize trying to kill it?
They learned that you could kind of part ranks around the elephant and kind of close it in and then kill it from behind. Also, there's a lot of different ways. You can release flaming pigs.
Wait. Flaming pigs.
Flaming pigs. You grease them up and light them up, and off they go. And elephants, the motion and the light freaks them out.
Of a running, squealing pig dying on fire.
Yes. So not very great for the animal, but highly effective apparently.
Oh my God.
There are all kinds of anti-elephant measures. But they discover eventually that the best way to do it is just to part ranks and kind of close on all sides. The elephant can't maneuver easily. The thing with elephants is that they panic pretty quickly. And when they do, they're as much a danger to their own side as they are to the enemy. Because an elephant on a rampage is rampaging on your left, right, anywhere behind him. And you don't want to be behind the rampaging elephant.
It's the most dangerous animal in a bush.
It really is.
People talk about lions being the king of the jungle and shit. And you watch some lion videos, they don't fuck around. But elephants are living, we talked about chickens being dinosaurs. Elephants are literally actually from that era.
Yeah.
That's
don't fuck with
crazy.
elephants. Yeah.
Oh my god.
So even Alexander's men, after a while, have had enough of this.
Is it bad that I'm rooting for the elephant?
I mean, elephants are great, right? Actually, famously, so there's so Pompey, Caesar's great rival, puts on a show in the Circus Maximus, Rome's big, chariot racing
come back to
venue.
that.
We will, yeah, okay. And he has at which there's an elephant hunt. They hunt down, I think it's a half dozen elephants, and the elephants as they're they try to escape, of course, and they try and get out, and they're trumpeting piteously. And people feel bad for the elephants because, no one wants to see them shot down like that. And it ends up being a PR disaster for Pompey because he had these elephants shot down in this way. Because people just started why is he these defenseless creatures? Of course, they're not like defenseless on the battlefield because they've been trained to attack. And they're very good at that too. But yeah, so anyway, Alexander's men make him turn back. He wanted to keep going all the way to China. He didn't know where China was, but he wanted just to keep going until he got to the other side of the world.
It's like the kid, dig a hole till you get to China.
Pretty much. That was Alexander. For him, it was an end to itself, conquering.
Do you think, it's easy to say what drove him, power, conquering, but what, psychologically, what drove that? Why do you think he got to that point where he's 20 and he's like, I'm going to go take over the fucking world?
Well, I think he was trained to be a general and a king from the beginning. At the age of 16, he led one of the wings of his father's army that defeated the Greeks at Chaeronea, and so he was always going to be a gifted. He was trained to do what he did, but he definitely had. I think he saw himself as the new Achilles. He loved the Iliad. He idolized the heroes of the Iliad, and I think he kind of saw himself in the mold of a Homeric hero. And, on the quest for glory, for arete is the Greek word. And he couldn't get enough of that, basically, that he knew that he was kind of ascending into the ranks of the immortals by doing this stuff. He was also convinced that he was the son of a god eventually. He went to an oracle, the oracle of Siwa in Egypt, and there was told that Zeus Ammon, who's kind of a fusion of Zeus and this Egyptian god, had come to his mother in the disguise of his father, and that he was in fact the son of Zeus Ammon. And this is music to Alexander's ears. And he's like, okay, cool. Okay,
bet.
Yes, exactly. And so he seems to have believed, really, more by the end especially, that he was truly the son of a god. And at least a little divine himself. So he probably was kind of in the grip of his own destiny, I think. He wanted to do what no other man ever had or could. And I think he would have kept going. When he died, he was planning to conquer Carthage, supposedly, to go west. And he would undoubtedly have faced the Romans sooner or later. It's one of those great, counterfactual things. What if Alexander attacks the Romans at a time when they're just getting started, pretty much, and, have conquered central Italy, but not much else?
Why didn't he go west? It was right there.
He died. If he had lived longer, he definitely would have.
Okay.
Initially, you mean? Why didn't he go west initially?
Yeah, why did he decide? Mm-hmm. Well, I know at the beginning, it was Persia versus them, so there was certainly the impetus to do that. Mm-hmm. But was it a matter of just over 12 years, it just kept going east, so he just followed the road because we just conquered here, and he never thought let me go back home and see what's what and strategize. It was more just next thing in front of us we're taking.
There was definitely some mission creep along the way. The whole thing, so Philip, his father, had planned this crusade against Persia, in which he would lead a coalition of Greek states in revenge for the Persian wars and, march into Asia. He probably never planned anything like what Alexander did, conquering the whole damn Persian Empire. But he would have marched eventually into what's now Turkey, Asia Minor, maybe conquered part of that. So the rationale initially is vengeance for the the Persian invasions of the century before. But there's also just more wealth in the East. There's not much going on in the West at this point, in the Western Mediterranean. The Greeks know how rich the Persians are, because the Persians have been using their wealth to foment dissent among the Greek city-states for decades at this point, more of a century at this point. And so once he's underway, so it's always going to be the East, and once he's involved, once he's defeated the great king, which happens pretty quickly, he defeats Darius III, the last Persian king of kings, in 331, so pretty early in the campaign. He could have stopped there, but he was committed then to conquering the whole Persian Empire, and he didn't have to do it, but he was just kind of we're here. And again, he had this mission for glory. And so it just took him that long. It was he actually went beyond the Persian Empire eventually, both in the northeast and eventually off into what's now Pakistan. But
over a 12-year period.
Yeah,
It's not long.
if you ever look at like a map, you probably could find a map of his campaign trail. It's just this giant
that.
series of arrows all over Asia.
In 12 years, though.
In 12
Again,
years,
It's
yeah.
like, fuck, man.
And yeah, so he was planning to conquer supposedly Arabia, the whole Arabian Peninsula, and then going off towards Carthage. But yeah, so like there's the famous those
There it
maps. You can
is.
see how it's just he has a hard time in Central Asia. What's now Afghanistan. Not the first person to have a hard time with Afghanistan, or last one rather. And 'cause
Yeah.
it's so mountainous there,
Yep.
and so all these individual barons and chieftains have to be defeated individually. And there's a lot of siege warfare. His men are climbing up icy cliffs.
Yep.
All these things that Greek armies had never done. But he's just such a gifted commander that any scenario he's put in, he can improvise and make it happen.
How was he so militaristically genius? Was that just like God-given?
That's just something that's innate. I mean, he's trained again. He's trained to do this from a boyhood. But
Again, like fighting in the
there's-
hills and mountains of Afghanistan, like you're not trained in that in Macedonia.
no, there's an element of just creativity in how he approaches battle that no one else comes close to in the ancient world. Supposedly, Scipio meets Hannibal after Zama. He's an ambassador, or Hannibal's an ambassador, and he meets him in Asia Minor, and they talk, about their battle, which is kind of interesting. This is like
Yeah.
20 years after Zama, and he asks. I'm sorry, no, this is about Pyrrhus. There's a whole thing where he rates the different generals, and Alexander always comes first in the rankings of different generals. But I'm mixing two anecdotes together, again.
No, but
The heat of the
that's so
moment.
interesting.
But anyway, so other ancient generals, Roman emperors, for example, idolized Alexander. He did what every Roman emperor aspired to do, which was achieve so much military glory that he couldn't be challenged, that he had so much political capital that no rival could possibly arise. Pompey had tried to do this, so had Caesar. And of course, it's no surprise that both of those men, Pompey and Caesar, idolized Alexander. Pompey took Alexander's hairstyle. It was kind of swept back, He tried to imitate that. Caesar visited Alexander's tomb in Alexandria. Augustus did him one better, had him open up the coffin of Alexander, so he had kissed the face of his idol. It was mummified.
Oh man.
It was in this like crystal coffin. But he broke the nose off supposedly in the process, which was pretty bad PR. Anyway, and even to like Caracalla in the 3rd century, Caracalla famously has the coffin opened again, wraps his own cloak around the mummified corpse of Alexander, and puts all of his own rings in the coffin and has him close it up again. So it's a whole thing.
They deified the guy.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
And so he becomes, the legend against which every Roman emperor, every Roman general measures himself. This map we had up there of the Roman Empire in the time of Trajan, which shows, this conquest off to the east. Those parts of Iraq were not part of the empire for very long. But Trajan did try to conquer the east following Alexander. It was just kind of the blazed trail.
And Alexander didn't leave any heirs, right?
Well, he did, but it was an infant, an unborn son was left behind him. And his wife from Afghanistan, Roxana, he also had other concubines, but only one as yet unborn son. And both the son and his wife were eliminated pretty quickly by one of his former generals. They were assassinated.
I was going to say also, I don't know how much racial politics plays in at the time, but like he was marrying someone who wasn't from like Macedonia or something like that. They're from outside. Was that an issue in politically?
Probably the old guard resented it. There was thought that they did. They would prefer he had married into one of their families, one of the Macedonian noblewomen. It wasn't so much racial as it was, cultural.
Right.
They just weren't Greeks. And Macedonians thought of themselves as being Greek, even though the Greeks themselves thought that they were, weird Greeks, Greeks on the fringes of things.
Yeah.
So Alexander is so fascinating because his afterlife is as rich and diverse as his actual incredibly eventful life.
Yeah.
He just defines what a king and conqueror can do for the rest of classical civilization.
How did he die again?
Probably malaria. Or he may have been poisoned. There's various conspiracy theories. He dies.
Let's get into them.
Yeah. So the center of his empire was Babylon. He had decided to he'd established himself there in the spring of 323 BC, and it was planning his campaigns off towards Arabia and the west. When his best friend and possible lover, Hephaestion, falls ill. He mourns him, and at this point he's already in pretty bad health. He'd taken an arrow to the chest in India. That this vicious barbed arrow went right through his ribs and had caused a hemorrhage. He'd almost died, and he'd managed to survive that, but was always kind of sickly thereafter. He was an alcoholic, a really bad alcoholic towards the end especially. That also weakened his constitution. And at one point in the spring, or late spring, he goes off to the marshes around Babylon and probably gets malaria there. And so he gets a fever, he falls more and more sick, his doctors can't do anything, and finally he dies from some combination of advanced alcoholism, his former injuries, and malaria is the usual guess. The conspiracy theory was that some of his generals had conspired with Aristotle to concoct this crazy potion from Styx water. I kid you not. The river,
the river Styx?
Like in the underworld, right? There was a spring in southern Greece that was supposed to flow with the water of the Styx. It was this like black, very cold water. It's supposed to be deadly to any creature. So the idea was that they'd gotten some of this Styx water with Aristotle's help and put it in the hoof of a mule, because no other container would dissolve under the Styx water, and brought that all the way to Babylon, where they put it into his wine and they had killed off Alexander.
Where does that theory come from?
It's hard to say, really. I mean, probably from court gossip right afterward. People wanted him dead, but I think it's much more likely that his many physical infirmities just caught up with him.
Yeah, and he was, as you said, like he had
a lot of reasons to die.
Yeah, and he had essentially in all likelihood, a male lover for his entire campaign, which I assume back then that was frowned upon, so that was kept quiet.
No, I mean, he would have been a little old for it. It's one of these things where what we call Greek pederasty, boy-loving, is one of the most uncomfortable aspects of classical civilization. And it's kind of confined to certain age ranges and certain elements of society. But it's usually an aristocratic guy in his 20s or early 30s and a teenage boy. It's kind of the coupling that's accepted. But if you're much older than that on either side, then it's seen as kind of unmanly. So it's a weird thing that's acceptable in certain scenarios, but not otherwise. We don't know what Hephaestion was to him, if he was just a friend or something more. That's kind of just later hypothesizing. In the Alexander movie, I don't know if you saw that. This is the Oliver Stone one.
I did not see that.
It's not great, so I wouldn't waste your time.
Did I see that? Was that Colin Farrell?
Yeah.
I did see that.
You did, yeah. So there are parts of that are pretty good. Many other parts not. But they kind of make it clear they think it's a romantic thing. But we don't know that. We don't even know that in the Iliad, like Achilles and Patroclus, which is kind of where this dynamic comes from. If that's romantic either, that might just be, a more platonic thing. But anyway, for Alexander in any case, he was controversial to his men, but because he became more and more Persian, he began to insist that they bow to him like a Persian king, like to a Persian king.
He became more Persian?
In his mannerisms. So before, a Macedonian king was kind of a first among equals. Like among his nobles, his aristocrats, they were pals. They hunted together. They would go to the baths together. But a Persian king was elevated above anybody else. And Alexander began to adopt the style, the costume, all of the courtly ritual of the Persian court that he had conquered. So he began to insist they do proskynesis, it was called. They have to make obeisance to him, go bow on the floor. And they didn't like that very much.
He was power tripping.
Exactly. He was power. I mean, he thought he was the son of a god. So this is probably a pretty small step for him.
That'll do it.
Yeah, that'll help. So it was probably he became foreign to them by adopting these customs from Eastern kingship. Less so other things he did.
Yeah, it seems like because he had so little time to conquer so much area, his focus his entire life was the military. But did he bring customs with him from Macedonia in the sense that, let me be more specific, there is Macedonian or Greek-inspired architecture coming up in his wake as he leaves places because his guys come in and they build things. Were there cultures and customs that were passed on as a result of the hurricane that he was?
Absolutely there was. So even though he's a kind of a comet, he's gone very quickly. But after his death, much of Central Asia, as far as Afghanistan, remains Greek for 2 centuries under his successors.
Wow.
And these guys bring Greek colonists and Greek customs deep into Asia. So there's a famous city called, or the modern name is Ai-Khanum on the border of Afghanistan and Uzbekistan, in the middle of the steppe, in the middle of nowhere. And this city, which was excavated before the Soviet-Afghan war, was a Greek city in the middle of the Asian steppe. It had a gymnasium. It had a theater. It had a temple of Zeus. They found the sayings of the Delphic oracle engraved, 4,000 miles from Delphi.
Whoa.
And so, and for many centuries, even the Parthians, who are these Asian steppe nomads, essentially, who conquer most of Alexander's former empire in the 2nd century BC, they used Greek as their administrative language for centuries. And there are Greek cities in their domains that were established by Alexander and his successors. Egypt becomes a Hellenized country. Greek is the second language of Egypt for 1,000 years because of Alexander.
Because he
conquered Egypt.
them,
Yeah,
right?
it had part of the Persian Empire and then part of his. And after him, the Ptolemies will then make Egypt their kingdom, and they use Greek. So any ambitious Egyptian learns Greek for 1,000 years because the Romans keep that language going after they make it their province.
The Ptolemies were before the Romans came in.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Cleopatra was the last of the Ptolemies.
When did the Persians conquer Egypt?
They had conquered it under Cambyses, so in the beginning, the late 6th century BC.
Okay, so that's the end of the pharaohs at that point. What do you know much? I mean, you know a lot of broad history here. I don't want to get you on stuff that you're less versed on, but do you know like what caused the Egyptians at that time to lose the massive power they had?
Well, they didn't really have massive power that late. The New Kingdom, the really famous Egyptian empire, was at that point almost 1,000 years in the past. After the 20th dynasty of Ramses and those guys, Egypt had really fallen to pieces. There had been a period where the Nubians conquered all of Egypt, another period in which the Libyans conquered Egypt, the Assyrians conquered Egypt, and there were short-lived native dynasties who ruled between all these foreign invaders. But Egypt had not been a colonizing power for centuries before the Persians showed up. They took advantage of existing fissures, and they kind of just swept in over a country that was long past its prime at that point.
And they left the pyramids there.
Because the pyramids are the pyramids.
The pyramids are the pyramids.
You got to work pretty hard to get rid of those things.
Don't fuck with the aliens.
Exactly.
They left it here for a reason.
Right. They came in peace and built pyramids.
That's right.
There's a famous story about a caliph in the 9th century who tried to destroy one of the pyramids for building material. And he set his men to work for a whole season, and all he did was make a big gash in the smallest pyramid, and that was it. You can still see it if you go. It's the Pyramid of Menkaure in
Can we pull
Giza.
that up? The Pyramid of Menkaure in Giza?
Menkaure, yeah. And you'll see there's a big gash in one side. Maybe a caliph would try to destroy the pyramid. But there's a proverb that all things fear time, but time fears the pyramids in Egypt. The Pyramid of Menkaure, that's it. And
Can we type in damage?
Yeah, and there's a big gash on one side.
Gash or damage on the end of that, and see what that says. It's not typing.
But anyways, it's a real thing. And the Persians were not well liked in Egypt. There it is. Yeah, that big slot there is what.
Wait, I see the camels in the foreground. That's a small one.
Yeah, that's the little one. Yeah,
he sent all kinds of men, and that's the only damage they did to it?
That's it. I mean, they took off the casing stones too, but otherwise, yeah.
What did he send? 5 guys?
I don't think they were too motivated. I don't know if they were being watched.
Yeah. That's unless it's like crazy on the structure's so crazy on the inside that they literally couldn't do anything. In which case, that's insane.
Yeah, I mean, it's just huge. And the fact that the first time I was in Egypt, and you've been, so the sheer scale of these things, and really why, it's easier to get stone than to pull these giant man-made mountains down.
Yeah, those are not human-made tombs, man.
They're impressive.
There's something, and I'm not saying they're not human-made. I'm saying they're not human-made tombs the way the story tells us that they were made. There's something else there. Could it have been humans? Yeah, but it had to be like, I don't want to get too lost in that, but that had to be like another civilization or something, because it's stunning how heavy the material is and how intricate the design is.
I'll point out my own expertise to return to the Romans. The Romans were fascinated by Egypt after they conquered it, under Augustus. And some Romans built pyramid tombs around Rome. You've probably seen the Pyramid of Cestius. It's right outside the Aurelian walls. Anyway, so it's about 150 feet tall, sorry, 120 feet tall. So not as big, obviously, even as the pyramid of Menkaure. But there's a little inscription on one side that says that this guy's slaves built this pyramid in 330 days.
Yep. There it is.
Yeah, there it is, the Pyramid of Cestius. And so the Romans were. I thought about doing a video actually about how fast the Romans could have built the Great Pyramid, with all of their economies of
that'll
scale.
go viral.
That'd be a fun one. We'll see if I do it, but I've got to tackle that topic.
So they were really fascinated with this.
But anyway, the Persians did conquer Egypt. They did kind of made a mess of it. They didn't respect local customs. Supposedly, Cambyses killed the sacred Apis bull, for example.
A what?
It's this bull is a symbol of a god, the god Apis. I think it's Apis, and it was a long A. Anyway, and he, this bull lives a very good life. He wears garlands. He has a special little pasture, and he gets to mate whenever he wants. And he's the avatar of this god Apis. And he's revered, and when he dies, he's mummified and buried in this plus-size sarcophagus. You can still see it at Saqqara. There's these giant sarcophagi where the Apis bulls were mummified and buried. Supposedly, Cambyses kills the Apis bull, which is,
Big no-no.
It's like spitting in St. Peter's, but,
Right.
It's really just something you don't want to do if you want to get the respect of the people you're conquering.
Right.
Alexander, by contrast, buys right into the whole pharaoh thing. He has himself shown as pharaoh in traditional relief carvings. He goes to Siwa. They love Alexander. He loves them.
Alexandria,
right, which he founds when he's there.
Yeah.
And the Ptolemies, too, they convince the priesthood that, they're good allies to have. And that is a large part of why they're so successful in Egypt for the first century and a half of their rule there.
Okay, so let's go back to the Romans then. That was a great
tangent
we
into
the other part of world history there. This guy, the range, Alessi, that this guy knows, insane. But so we were talking offline about when Rome really hit the exponential scale in sizing, because there, you can, when you go back far enough, it's like, when I think of history, time is almost exponential. We can think of the last 30 years down to every detail, and then the last 60 to a little less detail,
right.
last 100 to a little less, and then suddenly it starts to move really fast where you cover 100 years in the same way you cover 10 here. So when you get back to 0 or 100 BC or 200 BC, these years kind of blend together. But essentially, the ancient Greek Empire, which was before Alexander, right? So now we're talking 500-ish BC, stuff like that. When they're around, Rome is just a city, and it's a small idea.
Rome is probably about the size of, I don't know, modern Monaco. It's tiny.
Right.
It's a city-state.
Okay.
Yeah, very small.
So when Rome really starts to say, all right, fuck it, here we go, it's after Alexander even.
Yes.
And it's more say around 200 BC, is that right?
That's when they have a real empire. I'd say the takeoff point is the 3rd century BC. That's when they kind of go from being a large central Italian power to conquering all of Italy, and then rapidly, thanks to their wars with Carthage and the Eastern kings, conquering the whole Western Mediterranean.
Who was in charge of Italy when they conquered it?
It was kind of a patchwork. So south of Rome were a series of Greek colonies that had been established by different Greek cities during the Archaic period. So
that's why Agrigento has the ruins and stuff.
Right. Yeah, all those great Greek temples that are down there. Or Naples was Neapolis, the new city. And so there were the Etruscans to the north, and also a little bit to the south. They were they were also city-states. So Tuscany comes from Etruria, from the Etruscans. So around Florence, for example, that's all Etruscan territory. There are the Samnites in the Apennine Mountains, and then other tribes, the Lucanians, the Bruttians, who all speak kind of Italic languages that are kind of like Latin, but not so identical to it, like Oscan, things that are Latin-ish. They could probably understand each other a little bit.
Oscan?
Oscan, yeah, it's one of these languages. Pompeii, for example, they spoke Oscan there.
Is that a dead language now?
It is, yeah, very dead.
Wow.
And it was kind of again, a cousin of Latin, but it never became a literary language the way Latin did.
Got it.
So anyway, the Romans found this patchwork of peoples and cities and coalitions, and they had the hardest time with the Samnites, these peoples in the Apennines, who are these tough mountain people. And it's really there they evolved the legion as it comes into its definitive form. Before they had fought in a kind of larger, almost like Greek-style units, like a hoplite-style military. But then they kind of space out in those maniples, the checkerboard pattern you see like in movies that kind of evolves in the Samnite Wars. So it's all in that 3rd century when Rome kind of gets the playbook of conquest down and begins to expand to a major territorial empire.
And then that's when some of the other stuff you had previously highlighted comes in, where they get the Punic Wars going.
Yes.
Then eventually they work their way to Carthage, which is in North Africa.
Right.
Caesar gets to Gaul, takes the French, and then... All right.
So, I mean, a lot of the empire as we see it on that map is mostly in place by about 50 BC.
Yeah.
By that point, Caesar's conquered all of Gaul, all of what's now France. Pompey, his rival, has conquered the Near East, Syria, Palestine, down to the edge of Egypt. Asia Minor, modern Turkey, is all already Roman for the most part. And a lot of it at that point is ruled by client kings, these guys who are allies of Rome, but Rome really kind of effectively rules their territory. Yeah. They just don't want to bother with administering it. It's like the light green or the light red here is client kings on that map.
Got it.
So anyway, the Romans expand piecemeal, and it's a debate among Roman historians how much they meant to expand, or how much it was just kind of a consequence of the quest for glory of these generals who wanted, the respect, the dignitas that came from conquering a foreign people and having a triumph in the streets of Rome.
Who's in charge of Russia at this time?
No one in particular. A bunch of small tribes, pretty much. Some of the people we know as German barbarians, like the Vandals, for example, come from probably what's now Western Russia, and they work their way westward over the course of Roman history. But there are the Sarmatians, these horsemen who who ride in the steppes of what's now parts of Ukraine and southern Russia. But the Romans don't really go up there. The Romans go up to what's now Poland because they want amber. There's sort of amber on the coast of the Baltic Sea. So they send trade delegations up that way. But, after the disaster of the Teutoburg Forest, where Augustus loses 3 legions in what's now central Germany, the Romans withdraw to the Rhine pretty much. Don't attempt to conquer Central Europe after that.
Okay. Well, I think we're back at Augustus because way back at the beginning we had left off on him.
Long way home.
And this was, I like all the context.
Yeah,
that's why you're here.
I do what I can.
It's fucking awesome. But Augustus, like I was saying earlier, he's so fascinating because he had totalitarian leanings, but then also oversaw massive social programs, if you will, and kind of like expansion of the empire without there being so much war. Obviously, all these guys have some sort of battles and whatever, but he was presiding over a time where it's like, yeah, we're Rome, we're chilling, we got this, this is what it is.
The rules are different when one guy's in charge. That's what it comes down to. So the whole republic's dynamic is you have multiple power players who are all competing for power and prestige. And that means you tend to expand quickly because everyone wants the next big conquest, right? They're going after every enemy they can. But it means also that things are kind of disorganized. There's not much incentive to establish clear provincial boundaries, to have a good tax structure, to have sustainability. It's really kind of a free-for-all outside Italy. And they improvise structures that kind of come into being gradually. But when you have one guy in charge, one guy who wants the revenue of an entire empire coming into his coffers, things get standardized. He makes the army professional, finally. The army had not been professional in the Republic. It had been levies, people who had been brought in initially for just a season, a single campaign season, and then discharged at the end of that season. People like Caesar's legions are, kept under arms for many years, for 10 years or more in some cases, but they were not professionals. Under Augustus, he's like, okay, let's make this systematic. We'll have about 30 legions. They'll serve 25 years, every man. They'll be paid a big pension at the end, and they'll serve only me. I'll pay them. And so under him, then we suddenly have a professional army, and that army is stationed to keep him out of trouble and away from Rome on the frontiers. And so he kind of concludes the conquest of the missing pieces of continental Europe. He conquers the north of Spain. He conquers most of the Balkans. He tries to push into Germany. And after that, though, all of the obvious conquests in the continent, besides Britain, which comes under Claudius, are done. There's not much worth conquering in Germany, besides the prestige you might get from defeating the tribes there. There's no cities. It's pretty thinly populated. There's a lot of bogs and woods. why bother?
Yeah.
The Romans are always a Mediterranean empire, first and foremost. So that's kind of the rules of the game they understand, is an empire of city-states based in the Mediterranean world, the Mediterranean climate, Mediterranean way of life. And they'll expand far beyond that, but what's civilization to them, what makes sense to them is kind of that, that sort of city-state, that sort of life way. And the farther they get from that, the less they're interested in conquering.
What was his relation to Julius Caesar? Wasn't there some sort of like he was technically adopted?
Well, he was. So he was the great nephew, but he was adopted in Caesar's will. So he became his legal son and therefore his primary heir.
And so when Caesar dies, he doesn't necessarily become emperor right away. He like slowly worked his way towards it. You said it earlier. He changed the name of something. What was it? First citizen or something like that?
Princeps. Yeah. So he
wasn't that right away.
No. He's a teenager.
Yeah.
When Caesar's assassinated, and so he's studying as a student. I guess he would do that as a student, right? He's studying in a Dyrrachium in northern Greece, and he hears of his uncle's death, and he hears also he's his uncle's main heir. And he decides he's going to try and make a bid for power because he now has the magical name Julius Caesar. So by becoming an heir, you take your father's name as part of the provisions of his will. So he's now Julius Caesar. He has his father's name. He has the loyalty, he assumes, of his adoptive father's legions, his veterans. And so he goes right to Rome and makes a bid for power, basically, and becomes an ally after some skirmishing with Marc Antony and with Lepidus, another Caesarian general. They make the second triumvirate, which is a power-sharing arrangement that's formal, unlike the first triumvirate, and rule essentially as the first men in Rome. Eventually, Lepidus is pushed out, and it becomes Caesar versus Antony.
And he was pushed out. He lived till he was older. He was pushed out peacefully, right?
Yeah, he was made Pontifex Maximus, the most important priest, and he kept that till he died, which was well after Augustus had made himself emperor in truth. But so Augustus is just consul at this point, consul again and again. He's too young to be consul, by the way, but he kind of ignores all the rules. And everyone knows he has enough power to do whatever he wants, but he's not as concerned with the forms as yet. And everyone also knows that there's not enough room in the empire for two egos the size of Octavian's and Antony's. Antony had gone off to Alexandria, had become the lover of Cleopatra, and had several children with her.
Who was Antony, just for context, so that people understand?
So Marcus Antonius, we say Mark Antony because of Shakespeare. So he is. I
thought it was because of the singer.
yeah, other way around. So he is one of Caesar's most trusted lieutenants. And in the last years of Caesar's life, when Caesar was dictator in Rome, he helped Caesar. He was kind of one of his rabble rousers, his hype man. And so after Caesar dies, he's well placed to become one of the figureheads of Caesar's many supporters and his legions. So really, in the beginning, Octavian and Antony are fighting to be Caesar's heir. They're fighting to be the guy whom Caesar's allies and soldiers recognize as the new Caesar. And of course, that's what the struggle comes down to between them, that they want to be absolute ruler. Antony withdraws from Rome to take care of things in the east, which is much wealthier and really more interesting than the western provinces. He takes up with Cleopatra, who is the queen of independent Egypt at this point. Even though Egypt's kind of a client state of Rome, it's not truly independent.
So they were technically independent, though?
They still were then. The Romans hadn't, for about 50 years before the Romans actually conquer Egypt, Egypt's been dependent on Rome. They haven't actually taken it over.
What was the name of the civilization that starts with a P? Who was in charge of them before Rome?
The Ptolemies.
Okay, so did they? That's like PT. Right?
Exactly.
So did they lose it?
Well, so they had less and less power, and they were in terrible debt, the later kings. And the Romans had basically taken advantage of this situation to put the Ptolemies in their debt, literally. Roman bankers would come in to finance these things and to make the Ptolemies do what they wanted, to make them agents of Roman policy in the East. But they hadn't taken it over. It was still technically independent.
Okay.
And so Antony comes into Egypt, and for partly political reasons, but mostly personal ones, we think, takes up with Cleopatra, has children with her, and even though he's married and has kids back in Rome, so this is bad PR back in Rome. And then even worse PR, declares his children with Cleopatra the kings of provinces that are Roman provinces in the east. So he's giving away Roman territory to these kids he has, the Egyptian queen. And of course, Octavian makes full use of this PR. He's like, okay, this Antony's going Eastern. He's going all Oriental despot on us, and we can't have this. And so there's a propaganda war, which followed by a real war.
What does a propaganda war look like in first century AD Rome? Like, how does that work with the people?
A lot of bad mouthing in the Senate, basically. You make, coins that show your guy, Octavian, in the company of, grand old Roman deities. You restore temples to show how much you care about tradition. And you spread slander by every possible means about how Antony is throwing away his Romanness and becoming this, Greek.
Goddamn Egyptian.
Goddamn Egyptian. Exactly.
Take your pyramids and get out of here, will you?
Exactly. Pretty much that, but in Latin. And so in the end, it comes to a head at the Battle of Actium, that famous naval battle off the coast of Greece in 31 BC, where the forces of Antony and Cleopatra are defeated by those of Octavian, after which he is the sole ruler of the Roman world. He goes on to Egypt then, conquers
Do they have a
Egypt.
meeting? Like after that, does Antony meet with...
No, because Antony and Cleopatra flee back to Alexandria, and then both commit suicide there when Octavian pursues them and besieges Alexandria. And so then Egypt, with all of its wealth and grain, becomes a Roman province, finally. Becomes actually the private property of the emperor, pretty much. He's very covetous of Egypt because it's so wealthy, and its grain is so important. And Octavian returns to Rome and gradually reinvents himself as Augustus. Even the title Augustus was carefully decided on. It means something like revered one, or respectable one, kind of like our adjective august.
Yeah, now we got a month out of it.
Exactly,
Yeah.
named after him.
Yep, exactly.
And as July as Julius Caesar. So he takes that title. He thought about Romulus as an alternative one. They're like, no, that's stupid to
Like
Augustus.
Remus and Romulus?
Like the first king of Rome. But it's like, no, it's too much like a king. You want to be something new, different, Augustus. And then he has a series of, he takes on certain powers that have been held by other Republican magistrates and kind of cobbles together a position where he's not always the consul. He'll leave that open for other people, but has all the power of all of Rome's most dignified magistrates, and has a legal fiction for the real power he's always had, which is the power over the armies of Rome.
Yes.
So really, he's a military despot from start to finish. He has an army that he can unleash upon the Senate if he needs to. But he doesn't want to. He preferred to rule under the fig leaf of the old republic restored, and him just as the guardian of the republic, the first citizen, the princeps. And this position is maintained for quite a while, this fiction of princeps. Later emperors care less and less about that because it's established at this point. Everyone knows there's an emperor, one guy in charge. But when it's new, when there's still...
Got to ease him in.
Exactly, right. It's the...
I'm not an emperor, I'm a shepherd.
Exactly, right. We got there. And it helps a lot that he lives so long, that he's almost 80 when he dies. Yes. And for that reason, by the time he actually does go, everyone who remembers the Republic is dead, which really helps because all they remember is his rule. And so the transition to Tiberius, the next emperor, is pretty seamless.
But Augustus is officially where people say Pax Romana begins. So what do they date that to? Like 20 years into his rule? Like is it literally like right after Marc Antony's beaten? Okay.
It's kind of inexact, really. It's a modern term. Obviously the words Pax Romana, Roman peace, are ancient, but using it as a period is modern.
I didn't realize that. So we came up with that way later.
Yeah.
That wasn't coined at some point.
Well, it was like a slogan, you see like Pax Romana like on coins and stuff, but it wasn't like a period that was recognized. It's sort of how we describe really the first 2 centuries of the empire. Often it's Augustus to Marcus Aurelius, and so they'll often say like 27 BC, which is the year Augustus takes on most of his powers as emperor, to 180 AD, which is when Marcus Aurelius dies.
It's 200 years.
Yeah. And even 180, there are people who put it farther to like 235, which is the death of Alexander Severus. It's kind of a fuzzy thing. But it's, of course, it describes the period where there are civil wars, there are disruptions, but for the most part, the Roman Empire is the most powerful state anywhere in Western Eurasia, has no real foreign rivals, and is generally characterized by peace and prosperity.
Is it during Augustus's time that we see a massive? I'm going to compare it to something else that's unrelated, but like a massive Renaissance type period. Like
Yes.
later we saw that with the Medicis and arts and philosophy and literature. But during like Pax Romana, is that when we're getting a lot of the, say, foundation of the cultural items like that would later shape things we do across all of Western civilization?
Yes, actually, the reign of Augustus himself is the golden age of Latin literature. That's when Virgil, Horace, Ovid, all of the big names of Latin literature are writing, often in close association with the court of Augustus. There's this guy, Maecenas, who is a wealthy associate of Augustus, who is a patron for all these guys. And in return, they write poetry that kind of supports the regime in more or less subtle ways. It's like the Aeneid, written by Virgil, is kind of the foundational epic of Roman history and becomes the Roman poem, the thing the kids used to learn to read for the rest of antiquity. And this describes how Aeneas, this Trojan, has come over to Italy, and where eventually he'll intermarry with the Italian peoples. And it's meant to be a Latin rewriting of the Iliad and the Odyssey together. A challenge to the cultural supremacy of the Greeks. And there's a scene in which Aeneas goes down to the underworld and is shown the future, the great future of Rome. And all of this culminates pretty obviously in the reign of, guess who? Augustus.
Of course it does.
Right.
Marketing, baby.
Good marketing.
Very good.
Or Livy, the great historian of Rome, is also writing in the reign of Augustus. And we don't know how he felt as much about Augustus because the later books of his history don't survive. But it's pretty clear that he views the new stability of Rome that's brought about by the reign of Augustus as an unambiguous good thing.
And this is also when the population of Rome like crosses 1 million.
We think so, yes. We have no clear data on that, but a judge from like the people on the grain dole, people receiving grain for the emperor, from the size of Rome itself, it seems pretty likely that about 1 million, even 1.2 million, is quite plausible.
How do you, because again, you studied like literally how to do this in college, so you're taught by professors where this is passed down and everything. But when you're looking at history this far back, I try to have, I hope I do a good job, but I try to have such an open mind on information changing over time as we find new sources or something like that. But to make calls, like that's pretty cool. They're counting like the grain that would come in, but how do they know that the sources of the data on the grain is correct? Like how do you primary and secondary source the shit out of stuff to get like a good, I'm at a 98 or 99% confidence interval on X when it comes to studying this history?
Well, there's no hard and fast rule, to be honest. Very often we only have one good source, one literary historical source for any given period. Even for like the height of the empire, for the reign of Trajan, for example. It's incredible how bad our sources are for this very prosperous period of the empire, because we just don't happen to have that narrative history. For many of our most iconic historians, like Tacitus, for example, the greatest Roman historian, who did write under Trajan partly, we had only one manuscript for some of his works. That was it. One single codex allowed him to survive the Middle Ages. And so when we come to a bit of information that's nowhere attested outside of one source, we often, if we can test it with archaeology, great. But if we can't, we can only take it on faith, or say acknowledge what the source is and how qualified it should be, and just try and use context and parallels from elsewhere and other ancient sources to say, okay, this is plausible, this is not plausible. That's all we have. We have this pool of evidence that's very large in many ways, but the depth varies for any given point. And all we can do is plumb it, know everything we can know about any period or place, and be honest about what we don't know. You by the way, also have an amazing podcast that I really like, where you have on unbelievable experts on. Oh, yeah, some great guests.
Yeah, these topics from around the world. And what I like is you'll have on guys too that are really focused on one thing. Like, you had on one guy who was focused on like the history of slavery in the Roman Empire. It was wildly, I forget his name, but it was wildly fascinating. Do you remember who that was?
Jerry Toner.
Jerry Toner. Okay, shout out Jerry. But I think that was like episode 5 or 6 you had on your podcast. So we'll put that link in the description. But a lot of these guys, they'll get so focused on one thing and they become the source of that. And then it's like, they also may have the best intentions and be really good at what they do, but then we rely on them as the source of like this thing. And what if somewhere in their research, perfectly honestly, like they got this one little intricate part wrong, and then that led them down the wrong trail. So it's almost to me like, throughout the rest of my life, there will be pieces of this history in significant ways maybe that change based on new things we find or new people who dig into the field.
Oh, it's certainly possible. Actually, it's certain. We have, there are certain correctives to the inevitable fact that when you study something, you have ideas about it. You have opinions, you have a narrative bent, and that'll shape how you view whatever you're studying. It's just, you wouldn't study if you didn't care about it, right? And so we can't be objective as humans. We try and remove ourselves from the equation, but we can't entirely. There's that historian-shaped hole in the evidence wherever you're going. And so, but the corrective to that is that, well, first of all, in the sources, we're trained to know the languages themselves, Latin and Greek in this case. And so we get, as far as our competence allows, to the original meaning of the text we're reading. And we're working in a community of scholars who can review our work, who have the same expertise we do, and can, at least in theory, check our work. So it's not quite like mathematics where you can do a proof or something. But, someone can read what you're reading if your footnotes are good enough, and they should be, and say, okay, here's where he's taking this idea from. I agree or I don't. So even though you can never quite remove the historian-shaped void, you can make it editable, I would say. And so, it will change our idea of the past. We not so much new information coming in. There will be some of that. We'll find new papyri from Egypt. There's the Herculean papyri, the ones from that were buried by Vesuvius, that library. A quick aside on that then.
Please, yeah.
So I'm one of the advisors to this thing called the Vesuvius Challenge. And it's a project that's sponsored by some very generous venture capitalists from Silicon Valley to use high tech to virtually unwrap these carbonized scrolls from Herculaneum. So when Vesuvius erupted, it buried Pompeii famously under about 20 feet of volcanic ash, and buried the neighboring city of Herculaneum beneath a pyroclastic flow, this white-hot cloud of various gases, suspended sediment, everything else, over a mud flow. And this encased Herculaneum in about 50 or 60 feet of rock-hard sediment. And it flash burned and preserved organic material. So we have doors, we have shingles, we have all kinds of things that have survived nowhere else outside Egypt. And we have an entire library that was preserved in this villa outside the town. And there are hundreds of scrolls that were discovered, some of them partially unwrapped, kind of inexpertly, over the past couple hundred years. But there's now an initiative underway, this Vesuvius Challenge, to use high-resolution scans of these scrolls and AIs that can read the different resonances, the different signatures inside these scrolls to determine where there's ink, like the slight thicknesses in the papyrus itself, and virtually unwrap and read them without having to actually, hack away at the charcoal that is the scroll itself. And so this is last year, and so a group of AI researchers actually won the prize last year by discovering about 10% of one scroll that had not been read in 2,000 years without touching it.
And what did we learn from that scroll? Do you remember?
It was, there's this philosopher, Philodemus, who seems to have been based in this little library they found. It was one of his scrolls. It was a work of philosophy about the senses. So we know a little bit more about Epicurean philosophy thanks to that. But more importantly, we know that we can use this technology to virtually read these carbonized scrolls. And it's believed that this library they found back in the 18th century is only one of, probably two. There's probably a larger library still buried in this villa that might have thousands of scrolls containing many works of lost literature. So if that exists, and if it comes to light, two very big ifs, that could really transform our understanding of the ancient world in a degree not seen since the Renaissance, frankly. But even if that does not happen, we will find new ways to read the things we have, new ways to interpret them, new angles to approach them from. So things will change, and it's a good outlook to have that things are not set in stone. It's always a fluid text, the ancient history. But, we have our tools that work pretty well to decipher what went on in the past. And as long as we use those tools responsibly, we'll keep uncovering new stuff.
You know, people talk about future technology though on which is what you're getting at right here, but we'll go to the most wild realms and say like, oh, time travel and shit like that, which obviously would answer a lot of questions if you just go back and take a look yourself.
It certainly would.
Right? But AI, like it's almost like we skip over that and don't think about, and it's hard concept of what this would be, but you know, AI effectively could almost be like the middle ground to that void, where it's not like you literally time travel back there, but AI is able to use skills like the one you just laid out, as well as like, you know, infinite rounds of data permutations to determine probabilities on things and fill in blanks that allow you to basically go like, oh, if this, then, oh, yeah, that.
Right.
Thank you guys for checking out this clip. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe and hit the like button on this video. It is a huge, huge help. And if you'd like to check out this clip's full podcast episode, that link is in the description below or right here. And finally, you can follow me on Instagram and X by using the links in my description below.